trafficking is the illegal cross-border trade in animals and plants, which has transformed into one of the largest transnational organized criminal activities alongside drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and human trafficking. Wildlife means all fauna and flora. Fauna are animals and birds such as tigers and falcons, but it also includes fish. Flora, on the other side, refers to plants such as orchids or cacti, but also include timber and non-timber forest products, some of which are illegally traded at very significant levels. Wildlife trafficking contributes significantly to the problem through poaching, harvesting, or depleting significant quantities of already endangered or at-risk species. Trafficking in wildlife, animal parts, and plants has far-reaching implications not only for the species involved, but also for human livelihoods, biodiversity, and governance. The diverse and significant implications of wildlife trafficking in turn mean that the protection of wildlife, forests, and fish must be part of a comprehensive approach to achieving poverty eradication, food security, sustainable development, including the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, economic growth, social well-being, and sustainable livelihoods. Wildlife trafficking now ranks among the top 5 most lucrative illicit trades in the world, alongside drug smuggling, weapons proliferation, counterfeit goods, and human trafficking. Crime, as far as International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, or the ICCWC, is concerned, refers to acts committed contrary to national laws and regulations intended to protect natural resources and to administer their management and use. This may start with the illicit exploitation of natural resources, such as the poaching of an elephant, uprooting of a rare orchid, unauthorized logging of trees, or unlicensed netting of sturgeons. It may also include subsequent acts such as the processing of fauna and flora into products, their transportation, offer for sale, possession, or the likes. It also includes the concealment of crimes and laundering of the financial benefits made out of these crimes. Some of these crimes will take place solely in the country of origin, whilst others will also occur in the country of destination, where live fauna or flora specimens or their parts and derivatives are finally consumed. ICCWC is the collaborative effort of 5 intergovernmental organizations working to bring coordinated support to the national wildlife law enforcement agencies. ICCWC is the collaborative effort of 5 intergovernmental organizations working to bring coordinated support to the national wildlife law enforcement agencies and to the sub-regional and regional networks that, on a daily basis, act in defense of natural resources. The ICCWC partners are the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, the International Police, or Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank, and the World Customs Organization. This powerful alliance was formally established on 23 of November 2010 in St. Petersburg, Russia, during the International Tiger Forum, when the signature of all partners were included on the Letter of Understanding. At the international level, crime involves violations of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which regulates exports, imports, and re-exports of wildlife. The CITES actually entered into force in 1975. Under this convention, it was hailed by some commentators as the Magna Carta for wildlife. This regulates international trade in wild, flora and fauna and provides a framework through which trade in animal and plant species can be undertaken in a way that does not threaten their survival. Importantly, CITES also mandates suppression and punishment of trade that occurs in violation of its provision. The convention, or say the CITES, has brought together 179 nations to combat the illegal and unsustainable wildlife trade through a uniform regulatory regime and increased coordination on a global scale. International organizations such as the UNODC and the Interpol use the term wildlife and forest crime to refer to the taking, breeding, importing, exporting, processing, possessing, obtaining, and consumption of wild fauna and flora, including timber and other forest products, in contravention of national or international law. Broadly speaking, wildlife and forest crime is the illegal exploitation of the world's wild flora and fauna as defined under the UNODC. The UNTOC, or the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, on the other side, was opened for signature in December 2000 and entered into force on 29 of September 2003. Pursuant to Article 1 of this convention, its purpose is to promote cooperation to prevent and combat transnational organized crime more effectively. Since its entry into the force, it has enjoyed a high level of adherence. There are 190 states who are party to the convention as of June 2019. The convention does not explicitly decline organized crime. Rather, it sets out 4 offenses: corruption, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and participation in an organized criminal group. Furthermore, the convention defines the actors involved in the commission of organized criminal activities, and in doing so, it introduces a concept that is central for the delimitation of its scope of application, the concept of serious crime. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, or the UNTOC, was opened for signature in December 2000 and entered force on 29 September of 2003. Pursuant to its Article 1 of this convention, its purpose is to promote cooperation to prevent and combat transnational organized crime more effectively. Since its entry into force, it has enjoyed a high level of adherence, and currently there are 190 states who are party to this convention as of June 2019. States parties to UNTOC have been urged by the UN Economics and Social Council and the CITES Conference of the parties to make wildlife trafficking a serious crime. Available tools provided by the UNTOC that are relevant to combating wildlife trafficking and can be used when such crimes reach the necessary threshold include provisions regarding cooperation between state parties, extradition, transfer of sentenced persons, mutual legal assistance, joint investigations, transfer of criminal proceedings, and confiscation and seizure, among others. While UNTOC has been praised as an effective and necessary legal framework in the fight against wildlife trafficking, some commentators have discussed the benefits of a new protocol to the convention covering wildlife trafficking or environmental crime more broadly. Laws and regulations on wildlife trafficking vary from country to country, depending on the jurisdiction. Violations of laws relating to the environment, forests, wildlife, fisheries, endangered species, or protected areas may give rise to the administrative, civil, or criminal liability. From the UNODC, offenses relating to wildlife trafficking cover a wide range of conduct and circumstances, such as poaching or illegal hunting. Offenses in this category refer to the unlawful taking of wild animals. Next, illegal logging and illegal harvesting. Offenses in this category refers to the capture of a wide range of criminal activities associated with the chopping of trees and the taking of plants. Illegal processing. These offenses in this category involve activities that serve to disguise the origin of the animal or plant or conceal the species involved. Processing may be illegal because it is done without a license or with fake or illegally obtained licenses. For the trafficking, transportation, sale, and supply, offenses in this category cover a range of commercial activities involving animal or plant products and activities relating to their transportation. Trafficking in relation to the specimen means illegal acts by a person, whether for the benefit of themselves or another person, for purposes of introducing from the sea, dispatching in transit, distributing, brokering, offering, keeping for offer, dealing, processing, purchasing, selling, supplying, storing, or transporting. Under the import and export offenses, this relates to or specifically refer to illegal activities across international borders. Offenses relating to export and import of wild fauna and flora include inter alia, export or import without authorization or without proper documentation or with fraudulent documents, the export or import of illegally obtained wildlife and forest products, or the export or import of illegal acquisition, possession, and consumption. Offenses in this category are broadly aimed at criminalizing the demand that is the main driver of wildlife trafficking. So aside from the mentioned offenses, we have other related offenses such as animal cruelty. Offenses under this can serve to punish the way in which live animals are captured, transported, traded, poached, or slaughtered. Next is the fraudulent documents. Fraudulent documents are frequently produced or genuine documents altered to disguise the authenticity, illegality, quantity, volume, origin or destination of wildlife and wildlife products. This can also involve the removal, alteration, defacing, or erasure of custom stamps or labels or marks affixed to animals, plants, and parts thereof. Another is the money laundering and financial crime. Wildlife trafficking is often driven by greed and the desire to obtain financial or other material benefits. For this reason, a further important tool to criminalize and fight wildlife trafficking are offenses relating to the laundering of proceeds of such crime and to the financing of wildlife trafficking. Another is the tax offenses. Under this, tax evasions and the non-payment of fees are also often linked to money laundering and corruption. Another is threats and violence. Threats and violence. Wildlife traffickers sometimes use violence or threats or even deadly force to facilitate their actions. In such cases, criminal offenses such as homicide, assault, coercion, or threatening behavior are applicable. Under the offenses being committed, organized criminal groups are also involved. Wildlife trafficking, as been said, it is a crime that is often highly organized, fueled by the high profits associated with specific wildlife products such as the ivory, rhino horn, and the ability to utilize established criminal networks and personnel, trafficking routes, and resources to entice corrupt officials. Usually, or in some instances, established organized criminal groups have become involved in wildlife trafficking to diversify their income. Say, for example, the Irish Rothkill Robbers Group, known for their involvement in money laundering, drug trafficking, and theft, who was caught in 2011 attempting to steal rhino horn from museums and collections in Europe and sell them in Southeast Asia. So, aside from the offenses, let us talk also about the penalties and sentencing. As with the offenses themselves, the types and severity of statutory penalties for wildlife trafficking differ considerably between different jurisdictions. Under the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, there are aggravating factors and mitigating factors in relation to wildlife trafficking. For the aggravating factors, this includes instances where the offense caused a particularly serious result, the offense involved particular cruelty to an animal, the number or quantity of specimens or items involved, whether any animal involved in the offense was pregnant, gravid, incubating, or caring for dependent offspring at the time of the offense, whether the offender had previously committed any wildlife offense, the size of any financial or other material benefit, or the leadership or managerial role of the offender in the organized criminal group. Mitigating factors include instances where the offender had a lower or minor role in the offending, the offender had no prior criminal record, the offender showed remorse for the offending, or the offender voluntarily cooperated with the law enforcement officials to investigate and prosecute other wildlife crime. Now moving on, we have here the other effects of wildlife trafficking. It depletes natural resources and threatens livelihoods, which can result to severe economic loss, which particularly affect developing countries that rely on revenue generated by illegal trade. Another is good governance and conflict. It undermines good governance and the rule of law, and in some cases, threatens national stability. It causes biodiversity loss. It threatens ecosystem functions such as ecological problems of creating sex ratio imbalance. Say for example, elephant poaching of bull elephants, males with target tusks, has left a severe gender imbalance amongst African elephants and slowing the reproduction rate of vulnerable species. Next is the corruption and government involvement. Under the corruption and government involvement, because fauna and flora represent high value of natural resources, often under government control or regulation, they offer an important potential source of political power and a correspondingly high risk of abuse of that power. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption is a convention which criminalizes corruption and sets out various measures to combat it. Is complementary to broader efforts to combat wildlife trafficking under other international instruments. The convention contains several criminalization provisions that may be relevant to combating wildlife trafficking. It requires criminalization of bribery of national public officials, bribery of foreign public officials, and officials of public international organizations, embezzlement, money laundering, or the obstruction of justice. It further encourages criminalization of trading in influence, abuse of function, and bribery in the private sector. Corruption actually is a complex phenomenon. Corruption refrains from providing one overarching definition of corruption. Rather, it defines and classifies various forms of corruption as criminal offenses, such as bribery and embezzlement in both public and private sectors, abuse of function, example when those performing public functions misuse their power to obtain a benefit, training in influence, illicit enrichment, and money laundering. In the context of wildlife trafficking, there are numerous ways in which bribes can be offered and paid, not only to government officials but also to commercial enterprises and individuals who exercise control over certain areas, industries, materials, or the likes. This involves payment of bribes to government officials and politicians for preferential treatment. For example, award of a procurement contract, a logging or hunting concession, or a subsidy. Next, financial extortion by officials from operators to artificially legalize illegal operations such as the transportation permits, harvesting and hunting licenses, forest land use conversion. Another is the official decisions that favor certain groups. Say, for example, when allocating logging or hunting concessions with the tacit understanding that the group will eventually repay the favor. Lastly would be the hunting or timber companies evading national regulations with relative impunity thanks to the protection of powerful patrons. So aside from those, we have also the typology of offenders. Wildlife trafficking involves a range of actors involved in wildlife trafficking. These are the harvesters, intermediaries, and consumers. These actors differ not only in the role they play along market chains, but also in their socio-economic attributes, preferences, and motivations, in the scales of their operations and the intensity of their activity, the level of technology and investment, their source of funding, level of economic reliance, and their skill and knowledge, including that of relevant laws and regulations. Actors can actually occupy multiple roles in wildlife trafficking with a wide range of motivations that are both context and value dependent and that can change over time. Some target their activities specific species while others operate more broadly. The range and number of individuals involved in wildlife trafficking depends on a number of factors, including the expected end, market, and anticipated consumers, the characteristics of the trafficked item, and the capabilities and limitations of actors already involved in the trade. So, in trafficking of wildlife, we have also the different steps in order for the wildlife trafficking to be committed. First would be the collecting and harvesting. The initial step in wildlife trafficking is the collection, poaching, or harvesting of the animal or plant, be it alive or killed, in order to be further processed into a product or derivative of some sort. Wildlife trafficking is different from the trafficking of other forms of contraband. In most criminal markets, most damage only occurs when the contraband reaches its final consumer. In contrast, the main harm caused by wildlife trafficking occurs when the contraband is sourced. Once wildlife has been illegally sourced, the damage has been done regardless of what happens later in the market. The next step would be the trafficking. Following the initial collection, which is the poaching or harvesting, the animal part, or plant needs to be transferred to the buyer. Depending on the products and use, it may first undergo processing, modification, or manufacturing to alter it for the intended. The methods used to bring the contraband from source to destination depends on a myriad of factors including locations, distance, border controls, and other inspections, documentation, but also on specific requirements of the transported goods, whether they are fragile or solid, small or large, living or inanimate. Further impacting on the methods, means and roads chosen are the legal frameworks pertaining to the protection of endangered species, animal welfare, customs, and the like, and the level of their enforcement. Trafficking may involve simply hiding the illegal wildlife or wildlife product, forging permits, misusing real permits, or bribing customs and border officials. For some wildlife species, parallel markets and legal industries exist through which illegally obtained products may be laundered. Protected animals and plants can be trafficked across borders using a plethora of methods, including concealment on a person and in luggage, alteration of required permits and other documentation to reflect a different quantity, origin, or type of species, and modification of the trafficked item themselves. Next step, or say the last step, is the selling. Trafficked wildlife, including live animals, animal products, and derivatives, as well as timber plants, plant material, and product, is offered for sale overtly and covertly in a wide variety of markets. The range of places where such contraband may be sold is seemingly endless, ranging from stores and physical markets to persons selling goods in the street, to advertisements for private or commercial sales, to catalogs and restaurants, menus. In some places, wildlife products, even if they come from an illicit source or involve an endangered species, are on public display for sale. Elsewhere, they may only be shown if specifically asked for or after middlemen establish a connection between the seller and the buyer. This is to ensure illegal sales remain undetected by authorities. Depending on the commodity, it is also not uncommon for contraband to be commingled with licit products to disguise its origin. Some sellers specialize in offering wildlife contraband for sale, others sell them in addition to licit goods. Some only sell to trusted buyers to avoid detection and arrest. Others sell to the general public, including buyers who are ignorant about the source of the product or the species they are purchasing. They can also coordinate through online trade. The internet is an important platform for legal and illegal wildlife trade. It is a convenient medium for traffickers to advertise and sell anonymously. Furthermore, it enables direct sale to the buyer, thereby eliminating the need for intermediaries. Despite increased awareness and vigilance by some online companies, the proliferation of illegal wildlife products on the internet continues. In the Philippines, we have Republic Act number 9147, known as the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act. The provisions of this act shall be enforceable for all wildlife species found in all areas of the country, including protected areas under Republic Act number 7586, otherwise known as the National Integrated Protected Areas System Act, and critical habitats. This act shall also apply to exotic species which are subject to trade, are cultured, maintained, or bred in captivity or propagated in the country. So, talking about jurisdiction, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources shall have jurisdiction over all terrestrial plant and animal species, all turtles and tortoises, and wetland species, including but not limited to crocodiles, water birds, and all amphibians and dugong. On the other hand, the Department of Agriculture shall have jurisdiction over all declared aquatic critical habitats, all aquatic resources, including but not limited to all fishes, aquatic plants, invertebrates, and all marine mammals except dugong. The secretaries of the DENR and the Department of Agriculture shall review and by joint administrative order revise and regularly update the list of species under their respective jurisdiction. In the province of Palawan, jurisdiction herein conferred is vested to the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development pursuant to Republic Act number 7611. So that's all for my report on wildlife trafficking. I am Mabel T. Focasan. Thank you.